the needs of the market.
What's going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the Programming Podcast with Danny Thompson
And Leon Noel coming at you.
I'm excited for this one. We were kind of talking beforehand, and by the way, I'm Director of Technology at This.Labs, Leon Noel, Managing Director of Resilient Coders, and just overall cool human being. And I was talking to him about some of the things that I've been doing, right? And so let's kind of share this. And so one thing that I've been doing, many of y'all know I've been doing meetups and events and community-related events for years. And one challenge that I kind of gave myself recently was to create a meetup community essentially for like CEOs and CTOs of organizations. And I succeeded. We had some very notable people at the last one. Some of them I can't actually really name, but we had like CTOs of Fortune 50s come in there, right? And I had multiple reasons why I want to do this. Number one, it's definitely a challenge, right? You know, you go from doing meetups for junior developers and senior developers and engineering managers to now like CEOs of organizations. This is a different ballgame. It's a different caliber of person coming in the room, but it's different needs, right? They're not there just to hear the next cool JavaScript feature. It's the things that they want to hear about, people they want to interact with and network with, it's very different. And so the challenge was, can I even do this? And so far it's been a yes. We've had some very incredible speakers. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you've probably seen quite a few of them that I've mentioned or tagged in posts. But my goals for this was, number one, making the community. Number two, letting them kind of know about the cohort that we do in Dallas, right? We have a great cohort that's completely free. We don't monetize it, but it's a great way to get developers and pipelines and stuff like that. Number three thing, I wanted them to know about the conference that we're doing in a month from now. We're doing the Dallas Software, we're doing the Commit Your Code conference on December 5th and 6th. And we're trying to make sure that people know about it and they're kind of attending and going there, right? But the other thing is, obviously, it's also related to work. I want to have a stronger network of like decision makers and leaders and people that are related to actually saying, yes, we can do this. No, we can't do this. Yes, we can hire this person. No, we can't hire. And so what better way to do that than getting leaders? And in doing so, there was a conversation that spurred up about it. And one person said something very clear to me. He's like, Danny, I get that you want more people to get hired at a job, right? You want to bring on people, you want to bring on developers. But the thing is, we don't actually have a talent shortage. There's no shortage of talent. He's like, I can go anywhere, I could throw a rock, I found somebody that can write a line of React, right? The problem that we're faced with is we have a qualified talent shortage. And when he said that, I just kind of stared at him for a second. He says, Danny, when I bring on a junior developer, right, I know that we're going to be losing in the short term. This is something I've said for years, and to hear it from him without prompting was very interesting. Yeah. But it's like, I know I'm going to lose in the short term. But at 6 months, I need to be able to evaluate that candidate. Was this a good hire or not? And he says, some of these juniors, they come in, they're enthusiastic, they got all this stuff, right? And it's always great to see. It's infectious sometimes, even for the team. It gets them inspired and excited. But the problem is when I bring them on, they miss so many foundational items that for the next several months, we have to build their foundation. So if I spend 4 months building them up, at month 6, what do I really have to judge off of what they've contributed so far? I can't. So what happens then? I got to let this person go. So why do I have to go through this perpetual cycle of bringing people on that aren't qualified, building them up for them to then not be able to contribute at a rate that we as an organization need them to contribute to now say, this developer was a good hire. I got to evaluate them at 6 months. You know, of course, our mind can go through a million different scenarios. But the reality is a lot of candidates, especially in today's market, are coming in to where employers are feeling like they're not qualified talent. And so today I figured we could do our episode around the subject of how can someone be more qualified as far as talent? And I don't even think this applies just at the junior level.
Yeah,
I think this is a senior problem. I think this is a tech lead problem. It's all levels. So it's like, what can we do to make somebody a more qualified level of candidate so that way employers are taking them more seriously and they feel like it's worth it to actually take the plunge and get them into the organizations. So maybe we could start with Leon's approaches and some ideas. I know in past episodes we kind of mentioned like what you can do to kind of land in interviews and stuff. But really, I think we should start digging in a little deeper onto like what makes someone a more qualified talent.
For sure, yeah. And it's funny that we're choosing this today. We actually didn't talk about this earlier, but like right now, RC is doing our mock behavioral night. So we have about 40 plus companies that are interviewing all of our students right now. Google, HubSpot, all the big tech companies from Boston, Philly are there tonight. Like literally CTOs, engineering leads are taking the time to meet with our students and help them prepare behaviorally. So I think this is like the perfect topic. And so when I think about qualified talent, it comes from talking to these CTOs, talking to these engineering managers, and trying to identify like what their pain point is, right? And you kind of labeled one big pain point, which is at 6 months, can I make the decision as to whether or not I've wasted a whole bunch of money? And that's always been a hard part of hiring, right? This idea that I think the numbers people throw out there are like 20 to 30 grand to get someone in the door. Then you're paying salary for those first 3 to 6 months. For any company should have an onboarding process. So by that 6 month mark, not only have you spent tens of thousands of dollars, you might have had things where it impacted the pace of you being able to develop for your team. And so there's a big idea around getting this right. And it's why I think technical hiring is so convoluted. Every company does it different. It's why it's really hard to say do X and you'll be well prepared for Y job. And so when I think of qualified talent, there's one thing that you've mentioned in the past, which is like starting local and understanding the demands of like the companies that are local to you. Like, what do they need? And most companies days put out the things that they're building, the tools that they're using, the things that they actually need. And if you're a candidate that's applying in a local market, you should be attuned to like what those things are, what are those skills, and be taking that time in your lead up to your job search process to have those pieces as part of your portfolio, as part of your skill set. So that's kind of what I think about like preparing students for like that initial role. But then like the idea of qualified talent, I think comes down to like, what do these companies need? And I think each company can be slightly different. More senior orgs might have very different needs than a small startup. And so that qualified piece is very difficult. And then once an org has like identified what that qualified piece is, like how do you prove that you are qualified? So I think those are two different pieces here. Like, what does the org need, and then what can I do to demonstrate that I like can fulfill that need, with the understanding that this is a very hard problem. It's a problem that costs companies lots of money, and so there's a lot of pain and like fear around like different approaches to solving this. So I think when you're talking to these individuals, did any like I'll kind of say some things that we've heard recently too, is like, are there things that you are hearing that companies are looking for to make a candidate qualified? Like, what's that like that thing they're hoping for when they get to that 3-6 month mark that a candidate is doing?
Yeah. So for me, I can say these are things that I've heard, but this is stuff that I've been preaching in our cohort for the longest, and to be honest, preaching to junior devs, right? Like, when it comes to a business, what is one of the things that they need? Someone to understand a business problem, use case, and solve it, right? That's the job of a developer at the end of the day. And so for them, when they're bringing on these juniors, many don't have any clue what a business use case could be for something. And so that's why for the cohort, for example, one of the projects that the main project that we make them do, it solves a problem, it delivers a solution, allows them to talk about it. But we really delve into business use cases, because if you can solve any kind of business use case, you start thinking in the mindset of, okay, if the business is asking for this, what is this going to tie to? What is this going to do? And like one thing that seems so small is like UTAG analytics. If you were to talk about a project where you're like, hey, we have UTAG analytics on the homepage so we can track where users go, do you know how many business managers are going to light up with excitement? Like, whoa, you're tracking where they're going. Hold on now. Yeah. That's my dream right there. But it's like so many people don't know about that or think about that, right? And so the business use case is the biggest thing, because if you don't understand to a certain degree on like how to solve a business problem, and they have to educate you on business process, now you're just deducting time from you being able to contribute. That is why like whenever I'm interviewing at companies, I always ask like, what are certain benchmarks or things that they're looking for at the 6-month mark, at the year mark, so that way people think it's just a random question, but to me that's the roadmap. Like if I'm asking that at every stage of the interview, and every single person I'm asking that, they're saying like, oh, at 6 months I expect you to do X. That means I know for the first 6 months I'm running to make sure I accomplish X, so I can say like, hey, remember, you were looking at this, I hit that, so that way they feel more confident in their choice.
I think that's something that in the advice we give folks, like in that first, like, what are your first 3 months in the job look like? It's exactly that, right? Having a conversation with whoever is in charge, whoever is going to be evaluating whether or not you've been successful, and figuring out, hey, what does 3, 6, 9, and 12 months look like on this job? What would you deem as like successful? What would you deem as like, I'm knocking it out of the park? And then whatever that fruit of that conversation is, you type it up, you send an email, you have your digital receipt of the things that were expressed to you as like, hey, these are the things we really care about. And then you, like you said, sprint towards hitting those pieces, knocking out of the park. And then another thing I like to add to that too is the ethos that we talk about is like never eat alone, like from that very like classic book, Never Eat Alone, but like caring and understanding what your direct management cares about, what your skip level management cares about, what are like the goals of the org, and how are you doing things that support those like larger ideas, because you can, and if you can get your fingers into some of those pots, it makes you a more rounded employee. And then when it comes time for moving laterally to a different team or to getting more opportunities in your current org, you now kind of like know what you're working towards. And so I think having those conversations early on, building relationships with other team members that aren't just on your team, and really fighting hard to have an idea of like what the goals of the business are, like you're saying, could be really impactful long term. And it's something you can do from the very beginning before you're even interviewing, right? We have folks that are paired up. They're going to meet with 2 people in tech tonight. Most of them are going to be like hiring managers, CTOs, things like that. They got that list days ago. You should be Googling every single thing you can about that company. You should know what they had for breakfast on Tuesday. You should know what their like major goals are. What is their company shooting for? What projects are they building? And then like, how can you provide value? Like, how does your experience match that direction, that business value, like you're saying? And if you don't have those answers going into an interview, and if you don't have those answers, even if you've been there for a year, you got to really think about like, what am I doing that's like contributing to this like larger idea?
100%. And the other thing too, and this kind of just came to me when you were speaking. There have been many, many, many times where I'll jump on a call with a junior, not even a junior, like a senior, but mainly juniors are the ones that give me the most loudest reaction to this one, is they will do a tech stack. And I know we've kind of talked about this before, but let's say it's the MERN stack, but they're in a market where MERN is not desirable. And so throughout that call, we'll do some basic research and then realize, whoa, this is not working in this particular market where you're located. Maybe you live in an isolated place. Maybe you live in an area where it's more enterprise focused and they're using stuff like Java, C#.net, stuff like that. And in that call, we'll discover that. And then they will literally like roll their eyes and breathe heavy, like, oh my God, I got to learn something new. And it's like, if you are in that situation where you're now, let's say, going to a company that uses Java Angular, right? For them, knowing the MERN stack, that's cool, but they know that there's going to be a massive learning curve to Java. Yeah. It is not going to be desirable for them to onboard you with zero Java experience and then be like, we're just going to wing it for 6 months and hopefully they learn everything there is to know about Java. You may get lucky once in a while. I'm sure somebody listening to this will write a tweet like, I can't believe they would say this. There's always the outliers, but for the vast majority, because that's for our advice, we can't just think about that one random individual. Hundreds of people are listening to this. So now it's like, what are we doing to give advice that works regardless of zip code, region, country? And for that, it's going to be the closer you are to the parent tech stack of what they use, you're going to be in a better situation, right? And so If you know you have to learn a new language, it shouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't believe. But that's what's making you marketable. Or if you're learning a library that they're utilizing, for example, Spring Framework, which is very popular with Java, right? That shouldn't be like, oh my God, I can't believe I got to touch Spring now. It's like, you want the job and you want to be qualified. Because the other thing is one part of it is landing the job. Like I celebrate people landing the job, right? But making it to that first year mark is what I always say is that's when you turn a job into a career.
Yeah.
Right? You made it to the first year. You're now in a career. Because for me, you can get a job anywhere. But for me, I want you to build a career that lasts decades. And so I want your family to be taken care of. I want you to be taken care of. And just cutting corners is not going to be the way that you do that. And so that's what you need to think about. If they get to evaluate you over 6 months or a year, what are you doing, bringing to the table that's going to help you out? And you can't just say, well, I'm going to learn it when I'm on the job. That only works so far. Like you're going to learn a lot, but you need some kind of foundation to build everything off of. And so if you're skipping all of that, just like, I'll just pretend, that may work for some, but do you know how many people I see land a job in tech, get fired, and lose everything? Like, I can tell you right now, I did a Twitter space, and this one conversation always sticks out in my mind where a guy was basically, it took 4 months for them to realize I didn't have what they needed. They fired me, and because I didn't have that first year in tech, what did every employer look at? Whoa, why did he get fired so quickly? It took 4.5 years for him to get his next job in tech. I don't want that for the vast majority. Yeah. So it's like, what can you do now to ensure that once you're there, you're not just surviving, but thriving in that new market?
Yeah. And I think there's a couple pieces too, right? Like, where does your growth come from, right? I think a lot of folks, they get that first job. It's definitely overwhelming. They're trying to tread water. They kind of get to the point where they feel comfortable. And then that comfort zone kind of becomes where they stay into that first year mark, 2 year mark, when I always kind of try and yell at my folks like, hey, your growth should not be coming from your job. The moment you rely on your job to provide that growth, you're kind of in a bad spot, because you might be working on just the smallest subset of something. You're sitting there fiddling with HTML emails for 2 years and then surprised when it's time to find a new job or a new opportunity, and that growth hasn't met where the demand is, right? And the thing we kind of talked about in the beginning too is like the talent is there, but how do you demonstrate that you're the qualified talent, that you're able to meet the needs of the business, that you have the skills that they want? If you've been in a job for a year and your growth just coming from internally, that's often a bad recipe for folks. Like, what are you doing outside of work? What are you doing before or after that 9 to 5 to make sure your skills are still progressing and making sure that you're staying in tune with like the needs of the market? Your whole city can shift very quickly. I saw it with like the Angular to React phases in Boston. I saw even kind of like the falling or moving away from Ruby. Like, there are these shifts that can happen. And if you've just been locked in for 2 years, you can often find yourself in a really weird state. So I was talking earlier today during our 100 Devs huddle about this idea of like every 6 months, you should be like feigning this idea of getting job ready, feigning this idea of like looking to see what's in the market, seeing if your skills are still in need. Even if you know you're not ready to jump, like how are you staying sharp? And then while you're on the job, like that's a whole other piece. But then while you're on the job, like how are you continuing to grow so that you become a more important piece of the puzzle that is that org? And I think that's a whole other topic we can go down to.
So now we're going to be talking about our new segment, Ask Danny and Leon. And we have an email address you can send questions to, Danny and Leon's podcast @gmail.com. We have several questions that were actually submitted to us, so we're going to kind of address this one. And Leon has the first question that we'll be answering on the podcast. Go.
All right, first question. Big deal, folks. All right, let's look at it. How to tell a new company you've been with for a month that you are leaving for a new company. Interesting.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Bye. Like, it's not that hard. Obviously, there's some tact that you want to take into this. But for me, you know, there was a day and age where you had to be married to your company, right? That's no longer here anymore. And if you're leaving for something that's like rock solid, I think it's going to be better for everybody involved, especially you, because at the end of the day, you're the priority within your life, right? Like, yep. I'll give you the advice that my old gas station boss gave me, ironically. And he told me this when I was nervous about leaving, and he definitely had some different intentions behind it originally, but I took it in a different way. But he basically said, Danny, this building existed before you walked in, and it's going to exist after you walk out. And that for me was so telling on the relationship of a business to employee, right? Like they're always going to be there. If you're the reason why that business exists, especially after a month, you've got bigger problems there. It's probably best that you leave anyway.
Yep.
But that's just the way that I look at it. And so I think you need to think about your career. But now the thing that you need to really start thinking about is the place you're going to at least be there for a year? If so, that's the right move. If not, or if it's a gamble to a certain extent, like maybe you're leaving enterprise for a startup, that could be a different conversation in itself where you're taking on a lot of risk, especially your first month in your career. I don't know if I'd advise that or not. But at the end of the day, I would just go on and say, hey, it was great being here. I've realized that this opportunity was great. It aligned well, but I have an opportunity that's just out of this world.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I can tell you right now, for my first job in tech, when I left and I ended up going to Google after that, I told my boss, hey, I'm going to be real. I loved working here, but I got an opportunity at Google. And he was like, well, you got to go. Like,
get out the door. What are you doing?
What are you doing? A lot of times they'll be enthusiastic for you. So don't burn the bridges if you can avoid that, because it's always good to have an opportunity to go back to if things don't work out. But at the same time, be very tactful. Like, look, I was enjoying the opportunity here. Don't downgrade them. Don't diminish anything that you've done there or been a part of. Definitely keep it on high praise. But I would say this opportunity is just so much more significant for the income level and the growth. If you can match it, that would be fantastic. But if not, this is where I kind of need to go. And a month in, you're not really tied to it.
Exactly. I use a lot of the same terminology when kind of coaching folks through this idea like, all right, someone's paying me for my labor. If someone's going to pay me more for my labor, that's something I have to consider. If a company needed to get rid of my labor to save money, they would do it in a heartbeat. We saw it time and time again over the past 2 years. And so I can't have that mentality of I'm doing harm or I'm impacting this org. That building was there when I walked in. It'll be there when I leave. Like you said, there's no fault that I'm bringing here. But I do like to use the language that you're mentioning, this idea of, hey, I've loved working here. I know it's been a brief period of time. Susie's been great. You've been a wonderful manager. I could see myself growing here for a very long time. I have an offer on the table that I legitimately can't turn down for myself or my family. Right? It would just be irresponsible of me. And so unfortunately I have to part ways. I would love to, if you need 2 weeks of me to stay on board to make sure things are transitioning smoothly, I'm happy to do that. Whatever you need, I'll work really hard to make sure that that you all are not left in the lurch, but I really need to take this opportunity for myself, my family, and I hope that you understand that, right? That framing almost never goes wrong unless you're dealing with a jerk, right? Yeah. And then the other thing I think about too is like, if you got referred in, giving that person a heads up. Hey, I really appreciate you like putting in the word for me. This amazing opportunity came through, being real. I can't turn it down. How can I like salvage this relationship? I don't know the dynamics at play here. Like, what can I do to help you to smooth this over?
That's something that I've always done instinctually, but I've never thought about that being a part of the process, which I really like. That's really good advice. I would definitely do the same thing. To give you an idea, when I was referred into my first job, not referred into my first job, but referred into me returning to my first job in tech after Google, which was a whole thing of events, right? Like they reached out to me, the person found out, he kind of referred, it was a whole thing. But I told him, hey, I'm leaving to go to another organization. I know you kind of referred me in here, so it's like, it's your word, even though they kind of know me.
Yeah.
I don't want that being tarnished. Is there some way that I can present this to where I can amplify you by saying that you weren't part of my decision to leave and this and that? And so I ended up giving a recommendation. He ended up getting promoted, go figure. So he actually kind of owes me a check now that I think about it.
Yeah, gotta get your money.
Yeah. But I would say it's not a make or break. Yeah. Just do what's best for you. But please don't, and this is one thing I want people to realize, a lot of juniors, they get kind of blinded by the dollar sign, which is cool. Don't get me wrong. Everybody's here for money, right? Like you want to build a career, you want to provide for your family, you want to solve interesting problems, and getting paid for it is a bonus at that point, right? But don't get blinded by pennies, because in a year or two from now, you're going to be talking about much larger and more significant dollars.
Yeah.
Like I know in the short term, $5,000 could be a hell of a difference. But if you know one company has much stronger infrastructure and processes for you to grow within a role, sometimes that's worth the lack of that $5,000 in the short term. Because I can tell you right now, you can leverage those opportunities and experience and the name recognition on a resume to be significantly higher, and that's gonna be worth way more down the road. Like I can tell you right now, I'm making like 4x what I made on my entry into tech, but a lot of that was the building stones of like, how did it propel me within my career? What did it give me to talk about? What initiatives I was proud of? And so some people get blinded. Maybe they go to a startup, and there's nothing wrong with startups. There's definitely risk involved, but there's some startups that disappear in like 6 months.
Yeah.
And so it's like, boom, you jumped into an opportunity where it wasn't even around for several months, where you left a very stable opportunity. If you're doing that, it's something to worry about. So vet the opportunities before making that jump, especially in today's market because everything is so volatile.
Yeah.
But because think about it, if you lose that opportunity, you don't know what's going to be next, right? So make sure if you're leaving stable ground, you're walking in a stable ground. Now, if you're leaving unstable ground for stability, heck, that's worth whatever at that point.
Yeah.
So
I love that focus on growth. Those first opportunities, if you have the privilege, should be 1,000% growth related. How am I going to work on things that'll be impactful for me to then carry that to my next opportunity? How can I get more access to working on impactful things? Like all those should be considerations in the beginning.
oh yeah, because you know what's funny is I never thought about this early on in my career where it was like the name of the company matters. I never paid attention to the name as much as I did what are the internal structures, because I always ask those questions in interviews, like how am I going to rise up the ranks here? Like I don't make short-term bets. So if I'm making a long-term play here, what does that even look like for me, right? So for me, that was always important. But I remember having a conversation with someone who's, I guess they're kind of notable. They're definitely popular on like some internet circles. They have like a newsletter, whatever. But I remember having a conversation with them and they're a recruiter, right? And so he said, you think we don't look at the name of the company when considering a candidate? Are you dumb? And I was like, whoa, that's crazy to hear it like that. But he's like, if I have two resumes in front of me and one has more name recognition than the other, where it's like they worked at Google, Microsoft, of course I'm going to call them 10 times faster than the other person because I know where they worked. I understand the standards that they have. So that never really dawned on me early in my career. Maybe I should have been more tactful with certain companies and name recognition. I don't think it would change nothing now, thankfully, but it's definitely something to consider if you're leaving an opportunity. Are you leaving a name recognized organization for someone that no one knows? Because that may be hurting your chances for future growth.
I love these series of videos by Juan Solting where they like break down resumes and they put them in front of actual recruiters, and they just made up completely fake resumes with like atrocious stuff as the bullet points, just like really bad things that any recruiter that would see, they would just immediately throw out the resume. But because it had the 4 big companies on it, they never even made it to the end of the bullet points and right through the check. So it happens. Yeah.
Oh yeah. 100% it happens. Like, and it would be foolish to assume that it doesn't. I wish I recognized that earlier on, because it would have changed some of my strategies going forward. But I will definitely say, like, it's important to recognize that, especially for stability. Like, when you're talking about trying to stick around for a while and have a long career and demand higher pay, that's one of the ways that you do it.
Yeah. We have one more question if you think we can squeeze it in here.
Let's do one more. We can squeeze it in. Let's do this one a little fast.
All right. So we kind of talked about earlier today, kind of like the beginning, kind of about how do we kind of prove that we have the skills or that we're qualified talent, right? And so somebody asked here, what are tips for someone struggling to find a freelance client that working for somebody else, understanding the business value, providing real value to a business? What are those things that can help tip you into being qualified?
You want to answer this first? I have a whole take on this.
Sure.
And you kind of know my take, but maybe you should go first because I like the way that you explained one of the points.
Yeah, so I think for me, when it comes to freelancing, this is something that all of my students have to do. At Resilient Coders, in our entire history, every cohort that we've graduated has had to get a paid client, and every single one of them has gotten a paid client. We've never had a student not get a paid client. So it's a big part of what we do. And the reason why we get the clients is because we want to be able to say, hey, we've worked for real companies providing real value. Now, how do you find a freelance client? Often local first. Tell everyone, your mama, your grandmother, your friends from church, wherever it may be, that I'm a software engineer. I build websites and web applications for folks. If you know anyone that needs it, let me know. So I often kind of just put it out into the world. I put it on all the old socials that you don't log into anymore. I let everyone know this is what I do and I'm looking for opportunities. You will be surprised the number of leads that come in that way. Then I'm a big fan of dialing for dollars locally. So one of the very first cohorts that we ran at RC, we built out a list of every restaurant in Boston. We looked up two things about that restaurant. Did they have a website? And was it a bad website if they did? And we dialed through. We would call and say, hey, I'm trying to order pizza. I can't order pizza online. You don't have a website? Oh, I'm a web developer. Do you need a website built? By the end of the day, we had 2 clients signed. And so starting local, not being afraid to pick up the phone or show up in person to the places that you go to regularly can get a lot of those first clients coming in your door.
Yeah, I love that. To kind of give you an idea, going back to something we said earlier, when it came to creating this meetup community for CEOs, right? People are often asked, and you kind of even asked when we talked about this earlier, like, how do you get them to show up? And I was like, I didn't have a network of like CEOs. So it took me 4,000 emails and several weeks of effort to get 30 people in a room, right? If you're reaching out, every single person is not going to say yes, right? I'm not a sales guru. Like I can't sell stuff. Like that's not my skill set, right? I'm not a salesperson, nor do I have the desire to become a salesperson, right? Like that's not who I am. I'm a dev that likes to geek out with other devs and talk tech. But if you have value and if you can solve a problem, people are going to be interested. And so it's like, is every single person obviously? And someone will be like, the effort of 4,000 emails to get 30 people in a room is not great. I was like, yeah, but the estimated net worth of the people in the room were $100 million.
Yeah.
So it's like, you choose what that could be, right? And I'm not saying that to boast. I don't really have the desire for that. But it's to show, like, if you are putting in that effort and talking to enough people and getting enough conversations, people are going to reach out. Like, after that event, several of the people that I emailed came out afterwards, like, I saw the pictures of that event. It looks great. I'd love to go to the next one. They're coming to the next one. Like, that's how you start fostering and building community. And so when it comes to freelancing, the very first website I ever sold in my life was to a Mexican restaurant around the corner. The second website I ever sold in my life was to a CBD store down the road. And the third website I ever sold in my life was friends with the Mexican restaurant. They referred me for that. Now, were these $100,000 clients? Hell no. But I will say this. I sold the first website I ever sold in my life before I had my first job in tech, and it was for $1,800, and I was overjoyed, over the moon, and I was geeking out beyond belief. Right, $1,800 at that time of my life was crazy money, right? That's what you got to start thinking about. Now, obviously, it would be great to have a client that's like, I'll keep you on retainer, $5,000 a month, every single month for a year. But it's like, if you haven't even had your first job in tech yet, it's really hard for a client of that size to even trust you with some of the effort. Like, you need to really just be a codesmith at that point. Outside of that, you're probably going to get smaller clients, and there's nothing wrong with that. It takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month, who knows, whatever. But the thing is, you need to really think about this. A lot of people just think it's just a template. It's not just a template. You use a template as a starting point, right? Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you need to be thinking, what problem can I solve? Because that's what they're paying for. Otherwise, let them use Squarespace and save yourself the effort and time and save them the headache. Like, you need to think, what's the right solution? And sometimes the right solution for somebody isn't you coding a project in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Sometimes it's like, hey, maybe the small business needs me to use Wix or WordPress so that way after the fact they can update images. Or the secondary thing is, maybe this is a client that's going to need ongoing maintenance. So start up a maintenance contract with them where every month I give them 3 hours where they can contact me for updates and image updates and content updates. Now you've got recurring revenue over and over and over again. That's a value add and win, right? But don't always think, how do I get the Fortune 50 on the phone before you had your first job in tech? It would be great, but it doesn't always work out that way. But start local. Like, people are really, really intimidated. Like, and I know we'll have somebody from another country be like, well, my country they don't have a lot of income and there's not a lot of, whatever it may be. I'm telling you right now, it's 2024. I don't care what country in the world you're in. If you have a business that's serving stuff to people, they need a website. Now, your local corner store that sells like chips and stuff, they probably don't need that. Or if you're British, chips. I mean, what do they call them? Crisps, like that, right? Like they may not need a website, but if it's a restaurant, they need a website. If it's a dry cleaner, they need a website. Like all these services, especially services, they need websites, and you would be so shocked how many of them suck. Like they've got websites they got talked into that's not solving a problem, and they just straight up suck.
Yeah.
I remember one website I did for a dry cleaner, and it literally just said their hours of operations had like pictures of like clothes on a hanger kind of thing. It was like a blue background, like overlay on it, so you could barely see the clothing. And it just said like their store hours and location. That's cool if you want to get people there, but what about if, hey, they want to submit an order for pickup from their house? Yep. Boom. They did pickup service, but people would call on the phone, they'd write down the address, they'd go there. That's such a manual, time-intensive process at that point. What if you just had people submit their order online and you showed up in the morning and pick it up off their doorstep? Boom. We made that for them. It was a very simple process, by the way. It's not super complicated. And they were overjoyed to just get an email that said, hey, go to this house and pick it up. Done.
And the other thing, too, about that, just to kind of pile on there, is that I think people get hung up on this idea of that if I'm using these kind of off-the-shelf tools, that why won't the business owner just do it? You're forgetting the months, years you put into like learning the skills that you know about how the internet works, how you can build these things. And they're running a business. They don't have the time. They don't want to learn this stuff. So they pay you some money because you can do it in the amount of time that's reasonable, and they don't have to learn or do. They can keep running their business. So don't get hung up on it, right? What's the problem that they need solved? You figure out the solution to solve that problem. A lot of times it's off-the-shelf solutions, but they didn't have the time or energy to figure out how to do that. You're getting paid to do it. You're also getting paid for the years you put in to learn how to do it, right? And so don't underestimate that aspect of it as well, and don't get hung up on it. There are a lot of people that could use your help. You just gotta let them know that you offer it.
Jimmy the accountant doesn't have a clue what a lambda expression is. Like, why are you downplaying its ability? Like, if you can use regex to solve a problem, that's fantastic. Yeah. But it's like they don't know what magic and sorcery is happening there. Yep. So you need to explain, like, this was the solution. We ended up finding out through this path and by using this tool that we were able to vet and validate certain data going in to ensure we weren't getting these edge cases and bugs that were popping up. That, to a business person, is like, they solved the problem. Yeah. This is how they did it. I completely follow the path. They don't care, like, obviously to a certain degree, they don't care, like, if you used a certain tech stack or a way that you did it, but they do want to understand that the problem was actually solved. And if you can explain that, people are going to be interested.
We need to do a whole episode on freelancing. I think that'd be really fun to do.
Man, maybe we'll put that one. We need to do some technical episodes. We need to do some freelance episodes. We got to do it all. Matter of fact, go to our email. It'll be in the show notes and all that good stuff. And submit what kind of episodes you want to see. We'll probably do stuff around that. We definitely have a lot of ideas already. But if there's certain topics that people are requesting, we'll probably do them. But if you have questions, submit them. We'll answer them on the episode. See if there's a way that we can help you out on what it is that you're doing. We'll call that a wrap. I'm Danny Thompson.
Leon Noel.
Thanks for hanging out on the program podcast. And we'll see you on the next one.